Hey, LifeBridge, just going to be a short little video, hopefully, although you give a preacher a mic and a camera, and who knows what's going to happen. So I figure I'd give this a test drive before I record the sermon for this weekend by doing the Bible class. And I think we left off with Daniel 7. So I was just going to do a quick overview of Daniel 7. There's been suggestions about maybe using Zoom or some other conferencing so that you can talk back, we can hear from each other. That presents some other challenges because it gets people talking over each other. Some people's bad connections, stutters in and out, background noise. It gets kind of challenging unless you have you mute some people and stuff. So I thought about doing this and then having maybe a document or something available where you can put questions, or I can put questions and you can put answers, or something along those lines. Anyway, that might be in the future. We'll see. But for right now, I figure I just kind of go through it. I'm not going to try to go deep in depth on some of this because I like your feedback, and I like getting kind of what your questions are and what we're looking at. But at least this is something. So if you want to take a look, Daniel chapter 7 is where we're going to go. We just finished in Daniel 6. Gosh, when was that? A couple weeks ago now. But that was the last of the narratives. Now we're into the visions, and this is a whole separate aspect to it. So some of the vision that he had in the dreams, or the interpretation in the dreams, will mirror some of the things that he has in the visions. They're not identical, but there are some definite connections to some of these things, and you'll see some of that. So Daniel 7. I'm going to be using the ESV mostly. You can, of course, follow along in any version you want. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. So already, if you remember in chapter 6 of Daniel and the Lion's Den, we were past Belshazzar. Belshazzar was the one with the writing on the wall, and he was killed the night after he got that interpretation from his dream of that mene mene tekel parsin, the writing on the wall. You've been measured and been found wanting. Anyway, he died, and remember Darius or Cyrus, the Mede Persian, he's the one who took over. And then he reigned for several years. So we're hearkening back now. It's kind of a rewind. So I don't know, maybe do the to look back. To look back. Anyway, so we're looking back at Belshazzar. So he had this vision before Darius and before the Persians and the Medes took over. Before the writing on the wall, he had this vision. It was during that same time, but I'll even tell you that he kept some of the stuff to himself. Anyway, I saw a dream and visions in his head as he lay in his bed. That's some of the same language that was used when Nebuchadnezzar and stuff had his dream. Visions in his head as he lay in his bed, type of thing. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up a great sea, and four great beasts came out of the sea, different from one another. Now there's some tie-ins. Some will say that it's similar to some of the other stories of some of the other cultures in the time, but there are some very key differences, and there's not a reason to think that this is actually connected to or came from any of those things. Anyway, so they came out of the sea. Where am I? Chapter 3. The four great beasts came out of the sea, four different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. So let's stop right there and say, okay, so if we remember what the beasts were, I had that nice little table for you. So in chapter 2, when we talked about Nebuchadnezzar and he had that vision of the big statue. And so you had gold, silver, bronze, iron, clay, and then a mountain, and that mountain taking over the earth. So the gold, remember, was Nebuchadnezzar. Or standing in for Babylon, but really that was Nebuchadnezzar. So when you look at the lion, that's also talking about Babylon or Nebuchadnezzar. What's interesting about that is this whole aspect of being stood up like a man. So when you're talking about it, and not necessarily an eagle's wings in this case, but a bird of prey. So it could be a hawk or something like that. But the aspect is that a bird, a prey, is very fast. It's very agile, and that is a signification of how fast Babylon took over that world, how fast it conquered the other worlds around it. So when it first started out, Babylon was going after, and that was not necessarily Nebuchadnezzar. That was his predecessor. It's kind of slowed down a little bit in Nebuchadnezzar. But it was very fast in Babylon and how it took over these different worlds, these different areas, conquering. But then it kind of slowed down, and the wings were plucked off, and it was stood up like a man and given a mind of a man. Now, the irony of that, of course, is what happened to Nebuchadnezzar later on. Remember, the mind of a beast was given to him, and he was out in the wilderness and until he came to his senses, and that was restored to him. So this mind of a man, was it before that? Was it after or something? Or was it simply the aspect that this connection to this beast aspect? Yeah, it's not crystal clear, but it's definitely a harkens to that and brings those images to mind about what happened in chapter 2. Eagle's wings looked up, and the wings were plucked out. And 5. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. And it was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and I was told, arise, devour much flesh. Okay, so what this is really interesting on this. It's stood up on its side. It's not like it was on its hind legs, and 2 of the legs were in the air and 2 were on the ground. Man, I just noticed just how white I am. I am just pasty. Woo. Anyway, so a bear, that it's not up on its hind legs here. Instead, what does it say? It says it was raised up on one side. So half of the bear standing on its side, 2 of its legs are shorter than the other 2. And that's probably a significant description because it is a good description of the Medes and Persians. So if you're talking about the Medo-Persian Empire, definitely the Persians, you had a stronger, the Persians were stronger and they were more powerful than the Medes. So it was an uneven alliance and a balance. So when you're looking at this bear, the one side is representing Media and the other side is representing Persia. Raised up one side, had 3 ribs in its mouth. So it wasn't devouring everything because it only had the 3 ribs. It wasn't all conquering. It wasn't all consuming because it just had the 3, not all the ribs. Its mouth between its teeth, rise, devour much flesh. There's something aspect to the flesh there too. I don't recall. It was a while since I researched this. Then I looked, and behold, another like a leopard with 4 wings, wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given it. Okay, so the leopard also is a very fast moving, fast animal. So if we're looking at the different kingdoms here that are being represented, and we're going with the Roman view. Remember, there's a Greco view and a Roman view, and the Greek one is by revisionist historists and by critical scholars who are, that is, scholars who are critical that any kind of prophecy or any kind of supernatural understanding of the future can take place. So in their mind, that last kingdom has to represent Greece because it's representing Antiochus Epiphanes as this Antichrist figure, because that could have been written much later up to that time. It couldn't have represented Rome because that was in the future and they couldn't have known that. Well, in fact, it does represent Rome, and there's very good reasons to believe that and understand that from the text and from the understanding of the history. So we're going with that Roman aspect. So if we look at that, then we have that gold of chapter 2 is also in chapter 7 representing that by the lion, and that represents Babylon. You have the silver in 2, in chapter 7, that is the bear, and that represents Media or Media Persia, that Media Persian Empire. In this third one, this leopard, corresponds to the bronze, and that bronze aspect represents the Greek Empire. So when you're talking about a leopard, is also with these wings very fast, and we see that. And who's that representing here? We see that as representing Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was amazing in the way that he conquered so much so fast, so that speed, that swiftness that is referred to here in the selecting of an animal like a leopard. That's a very makes sense in there. Where am I? After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, this is chapter 7. Behold, a fourth beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came from among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and the mouth speaking great things. Great blasphemous things is what we learn. Okay, so different. It doesn't even describe what kind of animal this is because it was different. It was terrifying. We're not really told what it's like. And this represents Rome, the Roman Empire. Not anyone specific in the Roman Empire yet, but it is talking about that Roman Empire. I had something else I was going to say on that, and I don't remember. So, time to take a drink. And no, this is not spiked. That comes later. Not beer, it's tea. Okay, chapter 9. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. Obviously, that is a reference, Ancient of Days, to God. We would say to the Father, to God the Father. His clothing was white as snow, and his hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire. Those wheels on this throne is also connects with some of the visions and things that Ezekiel had on some of the chariots and how that moved around. Anyway, so the throne is mobile. And that's a key aspect because for those who were coming from before the exile, they believed that God's presence sat in the temple in Jerusalem. So the fact that he's not there and he doesn't have to be residing there, he is mobile. He reigns anywhere and everywhere he wants. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. Accounts and incidentally, those numbers are not to be taken literally. Thousands and tens of thousands. These are just of multitudes. Is the symbolism that is used there. Before him, the court sat in judgment. This is verse 10, and the books were opened. Okay. Then I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking. That is the little horn, the one that is being very boastful. And as I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed, and given over to be burned with fire. That is, it was totally destroyed. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. Again, we're not told what that is, but it simply means that there's going to be some aspect of those kingdoms that endures. And we can take from that their dominion, it kind of goes from one to the other. It's not like when the Medes and Persians defeated Babylon, that Babylon and all of its influence ceased to exist. There were still remnants. It was weakened. And we see some of that in some of the other visions. They're mentioning that their lives were prolonged for a season and a time until the judgment's going to come. I saw in the night visions, to 13. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like the Son of Man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. Now, of course, if you're looking at as the last one being Greece and stuff, and you're not even going to see this, and some wouldn't see this, but it is very clearly a reference to Christ. It is clearly a a messianic prophecy that is going on here. That Daniel is seeing in his vision the coming of the Son of Man, and we know some of that because of the way that Jesus referred to himself. He talked about himself constantly as one like the Son of Man, and it's referred to many times. He refers to himself that way. So him coming up and addressing before that, it is clearly a messianic reference. To him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, languages should serve him. His dominion was an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. I mean, how do you not see Christ in that? If you're not looking or you don't believe who Jesus is, period. If that's where you're coming from. Verse 15. As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions in my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all this. So this would be an attendant, one of those thousands or tens of thousands that were serving the Ancient of Days. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. These great four beasts are four kings who shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever, and ever. That's the short. I mean, he does, he doesn't need to go into details, but the aspect of the matter is who's going to win. It's the saints who are going to win. It's the final verdict that is going to happen, and all those previous kingdoms, those previous beasts are going to be wiped out. They're going to be judged, and it's not going to last forever. 19. Then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces, and stamped what was left with its feet, and about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up from, and before which 3 of them fell. The horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. And as I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them. Right? Okay, prevailed over them. Verse 22. Until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Again, going to be bad, but we're going to win. And that's what we hold on to. I mean, we can certainly take in our time, yeah, things aren't great right now, but we win. We win. And so we don't worry. Where are we? Saints possess the kingdom. Okay, verse 23. Thus he said, as for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth. And certainly, what do we hear? All roads lead to Rome. Now, so it's not like, okay, it took over the Asia and Africa, but it was the kingdom. It was the empire, and it conquered so much of that of the world at the time. It could be considered synonymous. Trample it down, break it to pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. There's been much debate on, is this referring to 3 specific ones, or how does that all work? And the fact is, we're not told. It's speculation. It is pure speculation. Okay, so I don't even remember where I was now. Okay, fourth kingdom, devoured 10 horns. Okay, so we don't know who these 3 are. Just that there's going to be succession. There's going to be some, and then there's going to be one that's going to be different. Shall rise one. He should put the other 3 down. 25. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. Again, no use in trying to figure out what that time frame is, what each of those stands for. We don't know. We're not given. There's not a conversion chart that is in the margins. We don't know. But the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom and the dominion of the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion shall serve and obey him. Here's the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my color changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. So he didn't write it. He wrote it down, but he didn't talk about it until later, and he was told to get it down. Okay, so the last aspect, that last horn that it's talking about, we refer to that as the Antichrist. And not that there aren't antichrists through the ages, but this is talking about specifically a person or an office or something along those lines. And certainly what Luther put down and what has been shown by many in the church deals with one entity, and we'll talk about that briefly in just a minute. But the aspect is that it comes within the church. It's a part of where the saints were. Because we see here, he speaks words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law. That's not the times and the law of the culture. That's the times and the law of God. Trying to put himself in the place of God from within. That's what makes the Antichrist so dangerous. Because it's pretending to be, to put himself in the place of God, or to speak on behalf. And because of that, many people will falsely follow, and will lead many astray, even amongst, warring against the saints, even against the saints in the church. That's why you need to be on guard. That's why you need to know what God says, know what God is asking, so we don't fall into that trap. Now, certainly within this, if we look at some of the marks, and this, I'm not going to get deep into this aspect, but some of the marks of what the Antichrist is point to certain things, and I'm going to see if I had some notes. Okay, the horn in Daniel 7, this is from one of the commentaries. The horn in Daniel 7 is the Antichrist, who perverts the gospel by speaking things that contravene the word of God. He was already present in the apostolic age, as St. Paul reports about the man of lawlessness, as he will continue his warfare throughout the church age until the second coming of Christ, who shall slay him with the breath of his mouth. We get that from 2 Thessalonians 2. That is, with the word of God. This identification of the horned fourth beast, and in particular the little horn, is confirmed by the parallel description of the second beast in Revelation 13. And it goes through some of that. So if we're looking at some of the marks, I'll get back to the marks in a minute, but it talks about the 3.5 times that was mentioned before is representative of the periods from the first coming of the Messiah to the final judgment of the fourth beast's little horn immediately after the Messiah's second coming. That is, from Jesus' first advent to his triumphant parousia, that is the end, and his final judgment. So, in other words, from Jesus' first coming to his second coming. From when he first came and redeemed to the second time, when the culmination, and he comes to pronounce the judgment of everything. That's very different. We call that amillennialism, because when it talks about the 1,000-year reign and the little reign, and all of these types of things, most of them coming from Revelation, but also hearkening back to some of these things. of our brothers and sisters in the faith, the premillennialists, the postmillennialists, all of those things, they have the certain kind of structure that they believe must take place. These little seasons and stuff, and they're trying to make some literal aspects to those things, like the 1,000 years, that is obvious and time again symbolic of the fullness of time. That is the time that God has set aside to take place. It's not meant as the 1,000 years, just as 144,000 is not meant as 144,000 of those who are going to be saved in Revelation. I'm not going to get more into that. I think that's probably good for now. Oh, yes, I was going to say, so the discussion on the Antichrist, certainly the not just Luther, but many in the church for years equated that, because of its description on it will prevent the preaching of the gospel, put itself in the place of God, dictate to himself of forgiving sins and pronouncing judgments and stuff that is only God's. God is the only one who could do that, setting aside the laws of God. That represented the papacy, not the Pope, but the papacy. There are some who feel that it represented a specific Pope, like the one during Luther's time that was extraordinarily abusive of power. But his aspect and many others felt that it represented the papacy because, like indulgences and things, saying that they can forgive sins. And this is not something that man can do. So even in the Lutheran Church and Anglicans and others, when we say, in the stead and by the command, I forgive you your sins, you're doing that as a representative of God, not as someone who is in place of God, not something that is saying, it doesn't matter what God does. I have that authority to be able to do and say and dictate. And that's simply not acceptable. So we can go round and round, and like I say, I'm not going to go into the details on whether or not or something, but I would say that if we always must be careful to say what Scripture says and not put ourselves or let anyone else put themselves in the place of God and what God's law and what God says is. I think I'm going to stop there for chapter 7. We could get much more into it in depth if we were together, but since we're not, I think we're going to stop there. God bless. We'll see how this works, and if we need to do some changing, we'll try to do that too. Take care.